Look at this thing.
Wait, where'd you get that?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you get that? I guess it's a mini one.
Yeah, it's a small one.
Because the full-size ones I looked into buying one are like $1,000.
Yeah, those are big boys.
Wait,
this thing I think was like close to 100.
Where'd you get it?
You know what, hun? Where did I get this? I want to say it was like.
And why have I never seen it when I've been at your house? And why have I never gotten to play it?
Actually, it was at my house when you were there. I just had it put away because I was like, yeah, I'm going to use it when I get this other stuff, like some of the other Native Instruments plugins and stuff.
Yeah, I've always wanted to play one of those. I've actually always wanted to play one of those. Wait, what key is yours in?
That's a good question. I have no idea.
Doesn't it just say the notes on the front?
It does. It just says it does say the notes, but just their numbers.
Oh.
It doesn't say. I mean, it says some shit in.
Wait, play the one. Play the one. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, look at that! I matched the pitch right away. It's C, so it's C major. It's a C. Yeah.
Perfect. I can A minor this shit.
Yeah, me too. We can. This is in C as well.
Perfect. Let's just. Bang!
Damn.
I can't wait to watch the VOD on that.
All right, let's record a podcast.
Roll the intro.
Here we go. Straight into the intro off that intro to the intro.
This is Steve Downs, the voice of Master Chief, Spartan 117. Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. Anthony and Skylar will take it from here. Master Chief, out.
Hello and welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. I am Skylar Sokol.
I am Anthony Nicolosi.
And this definitely isn't our third take of the intro, but even if it was, we would still be talking about interest curves.
Bang! Interest curves. Love it.
What
are
do?
interest curves?
I don't know. Can you tell me?
Are interest curves the amount of interest that you have in other people's curves?
Are interest the amount of trajectory that the interest you make on your bank account balance takes?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, maybe we'll have a podcast on interest yields. What do you guys think? Is that what you want to hear?
That's it. That's the kind of hard-hitting topips Anthony chooses for these podcasts.
Well, we were going to talk about that, but our good friend Jesse Schell stepped in and said, "Hey,
he was
guys,
like, no, yeah, you stop that. Those topics suck."
I've got a better kind of interest curve for you to talk about. And we said, "Oh, what, Jesse?" And he said, "It is in fact lens 69." And he said it like that.
He said, yeah, of course, because Jesse Schell loves the funny number.
The interest curve. No, Jesse did not actually talk to us. We are still trying to somehow befriend him over, I don't know.
Someday.
Yes. But anyway, the interest curve comes from Jesse Schell's book, The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses, a book that's often the inspiration of the topics for this podcast.
Yep.
Phenomenal book. If you're interested in game dev, you must read that book. It's super good. Or if if your love for the trade is jaded or fading, if I'm talking to an experienced game dev here, listen, pick this book up, give it another read, fall in love with making games again. The interest curve. The interest curve. What is the interest curve? I'll actually use Jesse's synopsis here. It's the he says the quality of an entertainment experience can be measured by the extent to which its unfolding sequence of events is able to hold a guest's interest.
Okay, cool. So, like, how can you get people who are engaging with your entertainment to pay attention, and how do you get them to keep their attention? Yes,
right, and keep their attention. And you can maybe using a more linear example like a movie where you see, especially using the Marvel examples or whatever, you have a bombastic or very engaging start to the story. Doesn't necessarily have to be an action sequence. It could be like a tragedy of some sort.
Just a major event.
Yeah, major pull. And then usually you see like an exposition that follows where it kind of sets up the setting, those characters, kind of their role in the world that you're in, and then things start to pick up to the main, encounter. I was going to say combat, but it's not. That's not the word. The main issue you're trying to the characters are trying to confront, and there's a battle. Maybe there's a sort of a loss. And there's a dwelling and a picking yourself back up, a big climax, and then there's, settling things down and closing things out. This curve kind of looks like a roller coaster if you looked at it like from the perspective of a graph, from like emotional intensity at points. Like you have points that are like, whoa, very powerful at the beginning, then it slows down, and then bang, it starts building up again, it comes down. So this is really the interest curve.
It's these contrasts of like excitement and lulls of excitement that provide this like re-engagement of attention.
Yeah, and if you think about it, other art forms have this in different ways. Like in music, it's not just necessarily what's played, it's also what's not played, right? And the usage of silence or it's maybe just leveraging whatever certain chords and scales and modes and whatever to evoke a certain emotional experience at a certain part of the song, or just the usage of a beat in a certain way. Some beats are just more they drive the heart, it's more intense, it builds in a different kind of a way. So you have art too, right? You have like parts of art and art piece that maybe sort of is set as sort of a backdrop to another, I don't know, more textured.
There's ways that art and music are composed, right, that have their own interest curves. But I think what's unique about this kind of interest curve, and music falls more into this, is that it's based under time, right? Like time passing is the main element of this interest curve, right? And how do you keep someone engaged for an amount of time? Because I don't think artists necessarily care whether someone like looks at their painting for an hour and a half or whatever. But the movie people definitely care. And
it's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Right.
I think there's a different. That's a harder.
Time is the dimension here that we're caring about, right? How do we keep someone looking at our thing for the amount of time that it lasts and still wanting to engage with it and wanting more of it afterwards? Quite frankly, generally in our current like landscape, how does Marvel keep making the same generic movie over and over, but people eat it up every time?
Yeah, and what does that maybe say about people, too? Mm-hmm. Like, that works. Jesse, when he's introducing the topic, he starts, we started, if you start at the beginning of an experience, point A, you say, the guest comes into the experience with some level of interest. This is very interesting to me, because otherwise they wouldn't be there. That's a very interesting perspective. Like, taking into consideration the fact that if somebody's jumping into your experience, they're coming in with a certain level of interest, a certain level of familiarity, right?
Yeah, that's cool. You don't need to like assume that they have no desire to be there at all and assume you need to like make them want to even be there in the first place. They're already there, right? Like that's a really interesting statement.
And it also lends like getting to games, right? The first time you play a game, your first experience of the game really almost always has to happen, unless like I guess you're scrolling through Steam or something and you just find a game that you've never heard of and you just jump into it. It usually you're led into an experience of a game by some kind of previous experience or moment where you found out about it or somebody told you about it.
At least like reading an article or hearing something or watching a trailer or whatever.
Which in itself is going to potentially influence the experience you're going to have moving into it, right? Like if you had a friend who told you this experience is awesome, blah blah blah. Like those are sort of the expectations, and maybe those are the expectations you're setting for the incoming experience that you're
well, and those are the
jumping
people
into.
you care about engaging anyway, right? Like, you don't care about having the interest of someone who comes into your thing being like, this is gonna be shit, I hate this already, right? Like, that's not the kind of person you're really trying to reach out to. You're trying to reach out to the people who are gonna love the thing you made already, right? And like, just give them reasons to love it.
Yeah, this also though, like I was bringing up because this means that it's important how you go about telling the world, this target market of yours, about your experience, whatever it is, right? Like the marketing of your game or your media is part of the experience a person has engaging with it, if you will. So, coming into that point, very interesting. So he finishes. This initial interest comes from preconceived expectations about how entertaining the experience will be, as we said. Exactly what captivates the human mind often seems different for every person. Jesse says, and this is really, that's totally true. Like you said, Marvel. How come those were so successful across such a wide demographic? You know what I mean? It was successful globally, internationally. It wasn't not necessarily just like niche thing in the United States. I mean, to some extent, of course, you know, the budget for you can't see these kinds of action sequences anywhere else is definitely going to play a part.
It plays in the budget, the marketing, the nostalgia factor. Like, there's a lot of things that they made going for them that gave it that widespread appeal.
Yeah, and in the American market, the superhero market, right, you've got a ton of emotional equity there that you can capitalize on. Now, I think there are certain things, though, that are core to people, and I think Jesse does kind of touch on that. He says some of them, even though what captivates people often seems different for everybody, the most pleasurable patterns of that captivation are remarkably similar for everyone. To see how a player's interest in your experiences changes over time, ask yourself some questions. One of which, he says, if I draw an interest curve on my experience, how is it generally shaped? So like we were saying before, a lot of times, so if we think about, you were playing Ori and Will of the Wisps this week, and you loved it, in case people are wondering. And I haven't played that one yet, but the first one.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up the first one as a really good example of good interest curve.
Yeah, the first one. And you can, if you want to. You can go for it.
Either way. I mean, basically, I think it's really strong because it starts out, like you were saying, with like a good intro sequence. There's this intro cutscene where a significant emotional event happens. It's like right at the beginning of the game. So you've got that initial emotional investment, which like builds such a relationship with the character that you wouldn't have otherwise. That's really important for you to like care about why you're doing all this stuff later in the game. And then the game has this perfect sequence of you have this intro and then you're sort of just going through a bit, but then you get to the story like beat where you have to like go to these 4 places basically. And those 4 places you go through them, the like interest ramps up and up and up. You beat the boss and then you go back to the beginning of the next place. Then you beat the boss, go back to the beginning of the next place. And you do that 4 times and you go to the big climax at the end of the final boss fight, right? Like,
yeah, that's true. There's like these sub-interest curves, if you will.
The sequence is like perfect, I think. It has a perfect like roller coaster feel, just like you described. There's enough like climaxing moments of the game that you stay interested and you want to keep playing because you know you're not that far away from the next climactic moment.
Yeah, and you know, I think there's something. I think experiencing a range of emotions is an emotional intensity at that is something that I would consider being a prominent feature of a lot of the experiences I enjoy the most. Like whenever there's just if it's just intense the whole time, it's kind of annoying after a while, and it's like kind of like draining, in my opinion.
I agree.
If it has these moments of lull where you can also, because I don't know, I like there's a certain amount of, at least personally when I'm watching, like when you are moving through these emotions, especially intensely, like if there's like, you know, Disney, like every freaking Disney movie, like somebody important dies right at the beginning, like there's a certain like amount of energy that goes like through it when you, that you expend experiencing that, if that makes sense, right? Like getting sad and like getting mad, you know.
Totally.
And same in the game. Same in the game. Like if you feel, and I think this is part of my issue with like not closing out Cuphead for me personally, is I felt like in game it's so like intense the whole time. And there's other reasons I don't like necessarily enjoy playing platformers, blah blah blah, but it's so intense, like, and you reset and you just go back into it.
Yeah.
And like when
Cuphead,
you
have to
like
make your own breaks. Like there isn't, right? You're just like walking to the next boss isn't really enough, right? So I totally agree with you. That game is structured like the interest curve of that game is like a very very fast up and down, like, right?
Yeah. It's like level like okay until I press A on the
breathe
next level.
for a second and then yeah, totally. And yeah, that's a really interesting insight that's one of the reasons you stopped. And honestly, I didn't finish it either, and maybe that's one of the reasons why. Like, although I really enjoyed the design of all the fights and the gameplay, maybe it's just that interest curve got a little old for me, right? Like, I prefer something a little more creative.
Like I don't know. I think I actually also think this is sort of related to that same kind of experience, that going up and down, that a large amount of energy expended on moving through like such ranges of emotional toll could be related to like why some people hate skill-based matchmaking and stuff. Like they hate just like always sweating. Like it feels like every time I jump into a game, it's always intense, you know? And maybe at least for them, it feels to them like Cuphead feels to me or something.
I guess
I would say
that's a different scenario, right? Because in Cuphead, the AI doesn't care whether you're beating it or not. But in skill-based matchmaking, when you're playing against shitty people because there's no skill-based matchmaking and they're having a terrible time and you're having a good time, you're like negatively affecting someone else's experience.
Oh, right. But you know what I mean? Like from if you are playing always against
though. Yeah. I say to those people, suck it up and shut up.
Yeah, I want a lull is what they're looking for.
Sure.
I think it's some of the amazingness of Rocket League, for example, how you can frickin' play that game for so long, right? I think it does a good job on managing that interest curve throughout. But,
yeah, and I mean, I think, yes, I agree that, but with multiplayer games, it's a big difference, right? Competitive multiplayer is a different sort of interest curve. Like that's much more driven by like your desire to improve and like the matchmaking system and the rating system and all of that, likely. Right. Obviously, in each individual Rocket League game, there's a small interest curve, but I think interest curves are more interesting when we discuss like these long-form narrative games, right? And how you keep someone engaged because like movies don't have to do this. Movies keep someone engaged for like 2 hours, right, max? But like Metal Gear Solid is like 50 plus hours. How do you keep someone engaged for 50 to 100 hours? Like, how do you keep Josh over in KO Koala headquarters engaged in Persona 4 to play it like 7 times for like 50 plus hours each?
Well, and I've talked about that, right? It's actually something that hasn't happened for me, you know, over the last 10 years. If I don't, I haven't been playing those long form games, and that's kind of part of it. Like that. Outside of the amount, it's an amount of time thing, and there's all these other kinds of factors for sure. But like, it's definitely not holding my interest enough to sustain me watching out the experience. I have the same problem with movies. I don't watch movies really, and it's like the same kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the same reason why I've recently only watch foreign movies now, because they have way different interest curves than like classic American movies. That's like all I watch now, because it's all I can find that like I feel like it's not just like a bad use of my time.
That's interesting. Movie review incoming. Find out what that difference is. I'll ask you. Maybe one of the questions Jesse poses to developers who are reading the book says, like, does your experience have a hook, something that grabs them initially?
No, I'll tell you, I think that there's 2 ways to make a hook kind of interest curve. There's the cheap way and the good way for me. And like the best example I can think of the cheap interest curve is like in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, when the guy answers the question, or like any game show and the host is like, oh, I'm sorry, you just got it right, or some bullshit like that, where they like fake that it's wrong and then they immediately tell you it's right. It's like the same thing in games where they like mention some scary boss, then you literally fight it like 10 seconds later. There's like no tension in between there, right? Like I think that kind of interest curve generation is really cheap, and I think that's really common in like mainstream American movies, that kind of interest curve generation. And that's one of the reasons why I think I shy away from them. Whereas I think foreign movies hold your hand a lot less in their stories, and same with the kinds of narrative experiences I really like, hold your hand a lot less. And that's really important for me to be hooked onto an interest curve, is if I have to do some sort of thinking to understand the story, it's not just like spoon fed to me or whatever, you know?
Interesting. Yeah, I would say that's definitely not what the general populace is looking for. Like I'm an example of that. Like too. Like if I have to work for it, it's even worse. Like I already can't hold my interest from that. Like if I have to go looking for interest, sometimes it's unless it's been recommended to me or something, you know.
Well, I'm not saying the interest isn't. It's obvious that there's interest there, but it's for you to discover, right? Like it's not just like it tells you like there's a giant scary monster and you're going to fight it in 10 seconds. Oh, look, there it is. Oh, my God, make sure you hit its flashing red weak spot, by the way. I'm a random guy in the world, but I know what a flashing red weak spot is.
So when you say that's like a disappointing hook, from my perspective, what a hook entails is like something that gets you engaged into the experience.
Right. So someone telling you you're going to fight a big scary boss, right, is a hook that would try and get you engaged, right? There's this big scary guy and he's ruining the world and you got to stop him kind of thing, right?
I see. So it's not in your scenario.
This is maybe a little more microcosmal than the kind of like long form hook you're talking about, but yeah.
Oh yeah, well it sounds like in your case when you have that boss, that big bad boss, you know, the thing that when you say it that way, it makes me think of Halo 5, where you had this like the hook was Chief was going rogue and there was some reason he was going rogue, but you found out all the details after mission 2.
And then it was like done. There wasn't like more mystery to discover.
And the rest of the game was basically like Cortana's taking us somewhere. Where are we going? And then at the like literally last level, she puts you in a box basically, and the game ends. So it's like, what the fuck just happened? Like, so from that perspective, I don't know if this is sort of what you're saying, but it's like the hook was there, as in like it engage me. I wanted to find out what was going on. It was more of like,
but then it just like was a cheap payoff, right?
Yeah, the rest of the interest curve was shit. It was just basically like it went up and then like, and then
right. Totally. Yes. I think that is very similar to what I'm saying for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you fight that big boss, you have that big moment, and then the rest of the time you're like, okay, now what? You know, like it doesn't rebuild. It doesn't like set up.
Sure. Or it didn't take advantage of that hook over the course of the whole game, right? Like it's like she went rogue. It's like a mystery for much longer in the game with smaller climaxes in between. And then you find out at the end, right? It wasn't like
I really hold to that like idea for the Halo people who are listening. Like if Halo 5 would have told the same story, but for example, you wouldn't have found out what the motivations of Chief going rogue and stuff were until like maybe 3/4 of the way through the story, and you know somehow it was the part in between there was done well as well, like building to it, then it would have been way more compelling. Like it'd been just like, oh shit, okay,
right, like
and then you have that
twist.
final battle, you know. Yeah.
Did you find out it was Cortana in the marketing material in advance, or did people not know going in?
Well, so in hindsight, you realize that you did. Like, if that makes sense.
But it wasn't like obviously told to you.
It was just like what it looked like. So actually, there's some controversy around here because people got pissed that they said that one of the 343 narrative directors lied about it, because what happens is marketing showed the cutscene that reveals this, right? They showed it in the marketing, but then the narrative, I think it was narrative director technically came out and said that, oh, that's just like Chief's having a dream at that point. But when you play the game, it's not a dream.
That was like the legitimate reveal and didn't want it to be.
Yeah, that's like a stretch to say it's a dream. Like it is in a way, kind of like he's kind of in a different spot when he experiences it, but it's not a like.
It was definitely
lie,
the thing, right?
It's like that happens, and then you're like, okay, Cortana's back, I guess, and like that was it, you know. So anyway, it's just that was the interest curve of Halo 5 sucked. It was shit, and I think that was a big part of it. It had a intense beginning. You were like essentially effectively a CIA agent Spartan guy hunting down Chief, like, oh shit, what's Chief doing? He's going AWOL. And then right away it's like, oh, that's why he's going AWOL. Oh, the guy who's hunting him down actually kind of likes him. Oh, okay. Like, what the fuck are we, like, you know, right away it's over. The excitement and the build was all over. So anyway, Jesse calls that out in the same way. He says, you know, does your interest curve have a gradually rising interest punctuated by periods of rest?
This is the Ori thing that we just talked about, why Ori is so perfect, right? You start, you hit a boss, you fight this intense boss, then you go back to the beginning of a section where you like need a new ability that you don't have yet. You like are just exploring the area casually. Eventually you find the new ability, then you have this like new way to explore the area and you get a more exciting exploration of the area. Then you find the boss area, then you get this intense fight that is like the climax of this new ability. And then you get story after that, like a narrative climax, an emotional climax, and then you go to the next area, right? Like,
and he calls that out. Is there a grand finale more interesting than everything else? Like you were saying, like every area has that.
And the fucking end of Ori and the Will-o-the-Wisp, dude. So
good. I can't wait to play it.
What a M. Night Shyamalan twist, is all I'll say. That's what Evan referred to the ending as.
Okay, I'm hyped. I'm interested in that. Like, yeah, it's the boss thing you're just saying before. The most interesting things got to happen at that climax, right? Like you're building to something, and there's got to be that payoff. When there's not that payoff, I think that's generally when you see like large consensus on that wasn't good.
Yeah,
you know?
another game that I think does this so well. BioShock 1 and BioShock Infinite both have some of the biggest payoff like grand finales of any games I've ever played. The grand finale of BioShock is like historically known to be like one of the best endings of any game, and then BioShock Infinite for me is the best ending I've ever played, but some people disagree. But I loved how the ending was done and how the grand finale worked out.
Yeah, no, I got to play it. I will play it.
Someday.
You know, one game I want to talk about regarding interest curves, it's fascinating because it's extremely successful, doesn't really have an error, but even from a gameplay perspective, the interest curve is like, I would say, relatively flat-ish. Is Minecraft. I think Minecraft's interest curve is like kind of like how you like working for your interests.
Well, I don't know. Minecraft, like the big interest curve in Minecraft is the day-night cycle, right? Like the day cycle where things are calmer, you're doing shit. If you explore a cave, you might get climactic moments, right? The big interest curve of Minecraft is when that fucking creeper walks up behind you and you gotta figure out how to deal with it, right?
That's true.
So it like, yeah, but it's not like planned. It's not scripted, which is really interesting. You do sort of create it yourself.
Yeah, and like, we were talking about like literally the Sims, the game, but also just generally life simulator
like
kind of
Flight
games.
Sim?
There's actually Flight Sim. What's like? There's a mastery path there in Flight Sim. You know, it's really cool to just choose wherever you want to go. A large amount of autonomy. I don't know about relatedness, what you can do from Flight Sim.
There's also no story, right? It's literally just like the simulation genre in general is very interesting like this. It doesn't, like, very few of them have like in-depth stories, in-depth modes like that. It's really build your own interest, right? You already need to be interested in the activity being simulated to really be interested in the game, I think, which is a really unique genre for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, that's the when you're making a simulator, I guess are you deciding that there's not really a interest curve in some of these?
I mean, you're just simulating a real-world activity, right? So people who are already interested in that real-world activity are your audience, and other people, if they join, great, but, like, the interest comes in that real-world activity being simulated, I guess.
Well, I actually would argue it's like a neutered version of real-world, because in the real world, there's other elements that
there's physical elements.
Variables, you know?
Yeah.
But for like inherently in games, part of the sell is the fact that it's a controlled thing that you can exercise like your autonomy on, right? Like on the world and the game thing. So it's like even less dynamic to somebody. Like I'm thinking Flight Sim.
Yeah.
Like you, so it's just, if you really wanted to, I was watching a stream the other day. I was telling him, just put it on AI control,
Yep.
fly from like LA to Sydney, put it on the background, and fucking fall asleep, dude.
Yep.
It's like
Totally.
great fall asleep kind of shit, you know?
No, it's very different. Yeah, it's a very different sort of interest curve.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unique, right?
And I think there's the success you've seen out of the Sony studios, not having played some of those games, but from what I've seen on the reviews and stuff, wipe something off the screen there, that they really have did a great job on those experiences as last gen from an interest curve perspective. I think of like Cory Barlog, the game director for God of War, was talking about, I think from a game dev perspective, they needed these sequences that were kind of like lulls in between moments and stuff. I guess they manifest in a couple different ways. I think there's like some where he's like Kratos rides in a boat with his kid or something, right? And they leverage those opportunities to tell insert story and narrative into there.
Yeah.
They actually needed those to be able to like render environments and shit in the background. But those lulls, right, is like I was saying, I think the art of understanding the rest and the lulls is just as big of a deal in a successful experience as being able to execute a compelling climax.
Oh, I will say, like, my favorite moment from The Last of Us that I talked about, right, the giraffe moment in The Last of Us, is part of a lull, right? That's part of a, like, just chill story section, right?
Well, that's just like to emphasize their sort of mastery of the experience. It's like, because I remember when you were breaking it down, you're just coming out of a section there that's kind of intense,
really
right?
intense, like fighting
really
section,
intense.
yeah.
So usually, you know, in the marketing and everything, we're shown the action, the shit, you know, all the shit you can do. But sometimes some of the most beautiful parts of an experience are those lulls, you know, those moments. I would call also your giraffe moment, it's sort of like a payoff after that previous section, you know?
It's like an emotional narrative payoff, right? Not like a gameplay payoff. And I think this is a big thing with interest curves in video games. I think video games originally, like with Pong and stuff, like the appeal of video games was that you could interact with them, right? And so originally games focused mostly on that interaction, like Mario, right? Nintendo doesn't give a fuck about the Mario story. There's a princess, you gotta rescue her. Yeah, she's not in that castle. Go to the next one, do it again, right? The gameplay was the hook, and the interest curve came from the gameplay. But I think what developers are realizing more and more, and Sony being one of them, is that game technology has come to the point, and just people in general want that like emotional narrative interest curve more than they just want this pure gameplay interest curve, right? And so that's why those games are now so popular and doing so well, and more games are moving to this like narrative focus rather than just the gameplay being the main focus, right? Like some games like What Remains of Edith Finch, or even more like Dear Esther, the like first walking simulator, literally has like no gameplay. You're literally just walking around experiencing the narrative, right? What Remains of Edith Finch has some gameplay, but it's all derived from the narrative.
Yeah.
So like it's interesting whether you make a gameplay game with the narrative coming from the gameplay, or a narrative game with where the gameplay comes from the narrative. And I think nowadays the second one is becoming way more prevalent, and the most successful games are doing that.
Yeah, and I 100%. I think you mentioned in there like the technology available today is a big part in that. You can't communicate the same amount of emotion and emotional intensity with the facial graphics of 1999 compared to that of now, right?
Unless you use a stylized art style, and that's why some of the like most appreciated games from that era, right, are the stylized ones, not the like fucking Donkey Kong 64 or whatever.
Yep. No, so absolutely, it goes hand in hand. I mean, that's just gonna get better, right? There's
Totally.
We know like Unreal Engine and many other, of course, studios and their engines, they're pushing that photorealistic boundary, right?
I mean, I would call out Death Stranding, dude. That game, like the cutscenes are basically like you're watching a movie, right? Like it's crazy how realistic the faces are.
I think post-production things, like I know what Blur Studio does, they did like, because they remade the Halo 2 campaign cutscenes, that's post-produced, right? Like, you know, it's not real-time rendered or anything like that, and it's unbelievable. It's like, holy fuck, this could be a movie.
Right.
It's so well done. The CGI is so good, but I think even in real time, it's getting pretty good. In some cases, you see, like, especially there was a whole blog post that Epic put out for those who are interested about how the face is a big deal, is hard. There's so many intricacies that we just expect out of the face, and that we pick up the issues in when we see these 3D renderings of them. And they're pushing, especially like leveraging machine learning and all this kind of stuff. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we're not far. You already see those deep fakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not real time. That's, again, post-produced, but we're maybe not far from that. Like, wow, is this real or not?
Mm-hmm.
When you see some of that like mega scan shit where they take like high quality photo scans of various assets, various kinds of assets, and they put that in game, it looks real. It's like,
there are screenshots from Death Stranding that you could easily think are real.
Yeah, dude, it's insane. I just actually saw something on Twitter. I retweeted on the KO Koala account. It was somebody made, like, I want to say it was like a part in Central Park in Dreams, for PlayStation. It's like a kind of like a mini engine you can build stuff. Dude, it looked fucking real. For a while, I was like, what is this? There were eventually parts that the textures gave it away, but I'm like, is this fake? Like, this looks real, That's crazy. And that's only going to go forwards to English. I also think, on the same note, if you think about like what the verbs available to game developers in, like, what are the kinds of things you can do in a game, the mechanics you can use with the input schemes that we are used to. Maybe another reason for the rise of this narrative is like it's easier to come up with a compelling story than it is to really innovate on the mechanics of a game. You know what I mean? It's like, what could a first person shooter do that's really mind blowing at this point? You know what I mean? Like, it's going to maybe be an interesting wrinkle to something familiar, but like compelling story is something that doesn't necessarily need, now that we have the technology to be able to maybe convey those better.
I mean, yeah, Death Stranding, once again, is a great example. That's like literally a walk around, and that's like a pick up and deliver quest, the game. Like, literally the gameplay is pick up and deliver quests, but it's like done in such a compelling way that it doesn't really matter that the gameplay is like relatively simple, right? Because the narrative is so strongly done, and that's like the whole walking simulator thing, right?
Yep.
I think Overwatch was an important is another good example of like what you're saying, right? Like, Overwatch actually did innovate on the FPS genre pretty thoroughly, but one of the major ways they did that was through their narrative CGI releases. They like not only had like interesting new like ability based gameplay that was pretty unique, but they released these CGI cutscenes and tied a narrative to like a competitive multiplayer shooter, which is not something that normally happens. You don't have that lore usually, right? So
Yep.
It's interesting. Yeah, narrative is a great way to like make the interest curve. Absolutely. Like, emotional and narrative based interest curves are really strong, almost stronger than gameplay interest curves nowadays.
Especially, we kind of alluded to it, but I think there are these sort of primal things that speak to like everybody, and is part of the reason why some of these properties can be successful across wide demographics in movies, but I think it holds for games too. Like, the need to survive, the need to like live, eat food, monster going to kill me, bad. Like, there's certain elements, like some primal elements, I think. Actually, you see like at least I think over the last 5+ years, the advance of like romance in games and stuff like that. I think that's another sort of maybe primal aspect that games maybe will start to touch on. That's also very hard to do without technological advancements. I don't know. It turns out we are maybe just all kind of the same. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think people might disagree with you on the romance thing, because like Mass Effect 1 had like really important romantic elements, and that was 2007. But
Evan said something to me in chat, but I don't say. Yeah, but that was like, I mean, That's fine. Maybe people thought those
And like
romance
Japanese
options were
dating
compelling.
sims have been around for a really long time too.
Yeah, but they sucked. Like in my opinion.
I mean, narratively they don't. They have very simple gameplay, but
maybe like from the perspective of like if the it was like what I was saying before from the technological perspective. Like if you can only render something so good, like how much can I fall in love with a cube? I guess is the
I mean,
point.
well, they use like hand drawn, right, like stylized art, right? So that's the whole way you get around that, and how old games have been able to get
Mass
around.
Effect like is.
Mass Effect is a product of the time, right? Like at the time, I think it's easy to view Mass Effect in a retrospective lens, but if you were playing it at that time, you would feel way more connected to the character now, I think. You would feel way more connected to the characters then because you couldn't see anything better than that, right? So it's easy to like assign your imagination enhancement onto the character, right?
Maybe.
Like to see the character as more real than it is, whereas now you look at it, it's like a joke.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, and maybe that works better for other people. Like, just for me personally, it's like, this is a joke. Like,
but
now
it's not 2007 right now, right? Like, I would be interested to see what you would have said in 2007 if I showed you that.
I knew about it in 2007. Mass Effect came out next to Halo 3, and, like, some of my friends played it, and they told me about it. I'm like, dude, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Like, I've ever seen. Anyway, like I didn't necessarily see like everything. Like my friends, like I effectively saw like the equivalent of two cutscenes, right? Of the actual
right.
game.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like to have romance in a game, you have to have time to like develop an attachment to characters in the story, right? So 2 cutscenes isn't going to be enough for you to develop that attachment. And I think with an emotional and narrative attachment to a character, it's way easier to forgive like a graphical shortcoming.
Maybe I don't know. The romance is something that I have yet to play a game that did well for me personally.
Interesting. I think a lot of people would argue that Stardew Valley has one of the best romance executions of any game that's ever been released. So
I haven't played that.
A lot of the Final Fantasy games, people like the romance in those. Yeah.
Really?
Anyway.
I didn't. Maybe they do.
Well,
I never. I like. There's characters who have romantic relationships and interactions and whatever with each other. But I guess that's sorry. Maybe I'm just not communicating what I mean by romance. It's more of like my ability in a game to autonomously engage with and start a romance and develop one more along the lines of like Mass Effect or something like that is kind of what I'm thinking.
I see.
For
So
Final
Stardew
Fantasy,
Valley does that. Yeah.
Yeah, Final Fantasy at least the ones I played,
No,
I don't think really had that, but
yeah. You're correct.
Anyway, right on.
Where can people find us?
I love them. You can find us at koalaentertainment.com. There you have links to all our social media and especially Discord. Discord, guys. You gotta jump in the Discord because Discord is where the community all hangs out. It's the soul of KO Koala. We do a giveaway every 3 weeks. I'm sorry, that is directly related to Agora, the research. When you join our Discord, you'll be placed in a research project for Agora. Agora is a big part of the in-game universe of our upcoming game. In-game universe, you say? Implying that there might be a narrative, you say? After we just talked about interest curves, you say? Maybe. You don't know. Including milestone rewards that do have lore tidbits. So if you want to jump into the in-game universe of our game, upcoming game, I'm sorry, join the Discord. There you also on koalaentertainment.com have links to everything else. YouTube, social media. Join if you're hearing this. Go to YouTube, follow us, subscribe to us, help us get to 1,000 subscribers. We're gonna see if we can get that this month. And yeah, everything can be found at koalaentertainment.com.
Thanks for watching, listening. Yeah, come watch us at twitch.tv/kokoala_ENT every week on Monday, and come check out the pre-stream where I play random games.
That's right. And where you have a chance, if you're listening right now, we're about to give away some stuff. You could have won it if you were here.
Yep, but you're not, so see you later.
See you later.
See you next week.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.